So any questions, etc., like usual, please? You can come forward. Sitting, so much. You want to create the impression of number, But I know how many you are, so it's all right. Yes, Tarsa, please. क्यों आपका कद इतना छोटा हो गया? You pushed it downwards. Waalaikum Assalam.
So the Imam of the General Mosque, Maulana Tahir Archive,
Yes.
has given me this piece of paper,
Yes.
which contains 3 statements and 2 questions.
Right.
They all relate to atheism.
Yes.
If you allow, I could read these.
Yes, you can take up these one after the other, not necessarily in consecutively and in one sequence, but we'll see. If there are other questions, we can make a break in between, and if the no other hand is raised, then we will permit you to continue with them. Right.
May I say here, sir, it says it's compiled by our friend, English friend Mr. Muzaffar Clark.
That's right. Once, I told him or sent him a message that he should keep on feeding us with such questions as are raised by the modern atheists, so that we can teach the Jamaat how to tackle such questions and handle them satisfactorily. Please go ahead.
The first statement here is, the scientific attitude today unmistakably asserts that there is nothing in the observable facts which suggests more than the facts themselves. The stars in the heavens, the electrons in their orbits, the facts of evolution, the behavior of chromosomes are, in strictly scientific terms, evidence for nothing but themselves. They do not point to something beyond themselves. If someone thinks they do, they are adding something to the facts, something from his own imagination or beliefs. This is not to say that his belief is not legitimate. It is simply that there is no common objective proof of what he sees beyond the facts. There is thus no scientific evidence for his vision.
Yes, please, Brian. Here this question needs to be analyzed before we begin to answer it at length. First of all, what does the questioner mean by saying that nothing should be attributed to facts beyond the facts? The word beyond is, a word which can be interpreted in many ways. Number one, beyond may mean that no inference should be drawn which is irrelevant to the facts and to which the facts cannot lead. The other connotation of the word beyond is that your sight should stay to the surface of the facts, and it could not be permitted to delve deeper and draw inferences. So if it is the second beyond that he is using in this question, then it is the beyond itself is rejectable, because the entire science is based on seeing beyond the facts. Otherwise, there will be no science as such. There will be no development at all, no discovery whatsoever, because the fact of falling of an apple should remain there. Yes, that the apple fell. But why should Newton draw an inference that because the apple falls, so it means this and it means that, and so a complete new science is founded on the fact of an apple falling. Why should the law of inertia develop on the fact that a thing moves and moves on? And all the calculations based on these things are things beyond facts, to which facts lead. But as far as the first connotation of the word beyond is concerned, we fully agree. No sane man can deny that facts cannot be interpreted beyond their limit. That is to say, should not be extended unjustifiably in the realm of wishful thinking. So every sane man would fully endorse this statement and agree with that. With this in view, to say that these facts which is quoted don't lead to anything which is not visible, which is not palpable, is totally wrong. Because electrons in themselves are not palpable. They are not facts as he sees it. They are inferences. And they have been inferences for a very long time, and now they are closing upon detecting in electrons what they call directly, but every scientist would know and would support this, that it is still not a direct observation of electron which they observe with the experience, I should say. It is also based on inferences. And as far as the facts are concerned, let me quote a Russian scientist, a living scientist, a scientist who has written some very high standard books for college use, for university students and college students on physics. And I have forgotten his name, but I think I can lay my hand to that book. I remember having written home for that particular book to be sent to me, because it's a very interesting book, and I think it's one of the best books written on physics. He gives an illustration about the scientific facts. He says that as far as we physicists are concerned, the facts we know are like somebody in a dungeon who is chained with his face facing the wall opposite the door. And he can't see anything directly what is happening outside. What he observes is only passing shadows. And from those shadows he infers what might be happening outside. And then he builds his own vision and says, perhaps that is that. So if that correlates later on, his faith may strengthen in the correctness of his inference. But if something else happens, then confusions are created. But as far as our concept of the universe is concerned, according to as he goes on, it is nothing more than shadows cast upon that wall which we are facing, and we don't know who cast that shadow and how the shadow was cast and what is the reality behind. So that is again casting a shadow of doubt on the reality of things. But also it negates the argument which he is building, this scientific student is building. If there are no shadows to be followed or inferred, then there will be nothing except the faces of the fact, which don't mean anything. Water would just be water as we see. There won't be any hydrogen beyond it, oxygen, as a component of this. So obviously no sane man can consider such a universe and be satisfied with that. Man has to delve deeper beyond facts, but in relation to the facts. Without that, the entire progress of man will be demolished and we will have to go back to the early stages where we could only observe what we observed, and that was all there was to it. Like an ant observes things around it, and that is the universe. So the universe is expanding because we have learned to see beyond facts. So if it is permitted in the material world, why should it not be permitted in the world of religion? Why should not religion base its concept on facts and to what the facts lead? That is the simple platform which we must build before we analyze this question further. Now, I think we have every right to deduce from facts and to try to see beyond. The scientists do that, but in a limited way, by working under the limitations they have imposed upon themselves. They want to discover the material causes of some facts as they appear, and they want to delve deeper into the material causes, what resulted this and what resulted that. At every end, they do raise the question of what was responsible for this. But they conceive that only a matter should be responsible for a material phenomenon. But they don't accept a thing to be the end all at any stage. At every stage the question remains what is next and why. So if they have a right to raise this question, why should not the religious people have a right to raise the same question? Why the same question raised by the religious people should appear to be absurd to a scientist? The direction of the religious people is different. And I'll compare these two applications of mind by religious people as well as by the scientists by way of an illustration. Then we'll understand that the religious people have every right to raise the same questions in a different direction. For instance, you observe cassette recorders. As far as a simpleton villager is concerned, he will not go beyond the facts. Everything there is to it is that by turning of a knob or pressing of a button, it begins to make noises of sounds and music and things. And that is all there is to it. A scientist who would begin to examine this, he would begin to examine it from the point of view of cause and effect and the interrelationship of parts and so on. So he will start making investigation from top to bottom until he unsolves the mystery of how that cassette recorder is created. If somebody else raised the question, okay, you have understood the mechanism of this, you know every answer to every question you raised, but do I have a right to raise the question, who did it? What should be the answer of that scientist? No. According to this atheist, the answer should be, no, you have no right to raise the question, who made it? Because we have solved the mystery of how it was made. So when the mystery of how it is made is solved, why should you have a right to raise the question of who made it? Will that be a correct and sensible approach, or would it be a stupid approach? That is my question. If there is an organization, it is not enough to understand how that organization came into being. The next question is a valid question, who is responsible for creating that organization? The scientists are not interested in that, but the religious people are. And this question remains valid. No sane man can dispel this question as, hocus pocus or occult or anything bizarre or unacceptable to common sense. Because if you go on comparing this attitude of the religious people with the scientists, in every field you can demonstrate that the scientist is only interested in hows, not in whos. But the religious people are interested in whos and not as much in hows. So the more complicated the hows become, the more necessary it becomes and more valid the question becomes on who made it. Less complicated the hows are, less important the question of who appears relatively. So these scientists themselves are proving the point for us. We don't know the hows of the complicated universe or the inner world of electrons. They know it, and the more complicated they make it appear to us, the greater becomes the question who. Because nothing which is organized can be the creator of itself. The very existence in itself may not be an indicator, because I have tackled this question earlier, that anything which is can be forever, from forever, can be from eternity. So if somebody says because there is universe so there has to be a God, this is not a correct approach. If God could be eternal, why not universe? And vice versa. This is what they forget, these so-called atheist scientists, that if the universe has a right to be eternal, why not God? The question is, whoever is eternal in a complicated universe, he has to be a conscious organizer. Because one thing is proved beyond doubt, that the organization is not eternal. Right from the start of the world Go, 20 billion years ago, when the Big Bang started taking shape, there appears to be a constant evolution in organization. And that organization has a direction, has a purpose, has a complicity, an involvement that leads to some organizer and has an order and co-relationship. Why should suddenly the matter be split into smaller particles revolving around each other with mutual affinities, with laws which govern them, and with a definite course of action which they simply cannot revolt against? They have to follow those laws and those impositions upon them. If there is no creator, no organizer, why should the organization be? That is the question. Now, look at it strictly speaking from the point of view of a physicist, because he seems to be a physicist because his illustrations all belong to either he's a physicist or an astronomer or something. Whatever he be. In fact, from whichever scientific field you examine this question, without fail, without exception, you will be led to the whos. Who is responsible? Because everywhere there is an organization which is incomprehensible without conceiving the existence of an outside agency. This is the dilemma which we face and for which we find no answer except that there has to be some outside agency responsible for this order and mutual relationship. For instance, in the world of physics and the world of the creation of the universe, there is a complete correlationship, and laws of physics have a definite direction and a complete organization and a very strict organization within them. These laws have an organization and possibilities and also limitations. There are limitations imposed on that law, on those laws, which dispel the possibility of their evolving beyond a certain stage without an outside agency's help. For instance, television or the video, they are governed by physical laws. There is no doubt about it. But the limitation of the physical laws is that these laws could not be organized by themselves into a television or into a video set. This is what I mean by an organization which compels us to think beyond and to consider the question of who is responsible for this. So a scientist cannot dispel the need of a mechanic or an inventor or a builder by telling us simply that all these are physical laws. Can't you understand, you simpletons, that a television follows strictly physical laws, which are there globally. They don't defy these laws. So because they don't, so there is no need for any builder. That is your imagination. Will that be a valid question? It will be stupid. So the scientists are not interested in this question in which religion is interested. But that question is given strength by the scientists' observations of how things run. They reach a stage of discovery where we are positively, more and more positively convinced that this correlationship and organization could not be there without the existence of an outside governing body which knows the inner secrets of the universe and which knows the laws of physics. Now I turn to an organ in your body, which is eye. A physicist can tell you that the eye follows the physical laws and it does not defy any physical law. It is built entirely on the conception and understanding of physical laws. So is a camera. For instance, the modern cameras, consider any camera made in Switzerland or in Sweden, as I understand, they make the most sophisticated cameras. They also follow the physical laws, like the eye does. But the building of eye is still by far most excellent thing. And no camera, however complicated it may be, can compare in excellence with the building of the eye. The purity, not only the building of the eye, but also its messages to the brain center and the evolving of a picture there and its inversion automatically and understanding of what is happening, what the camera is receiving. Now such a camera is not yet invented, even its preliminary stages. A camera which can receive a message, which can decode it and turn it into a picture by understanding what is going on around. So the eye is a complete unit, and this unit has a complicated correlationship which of course is based on the laws of physics, but which could not come into being by itself, because it is more complicated than the modern cameras, and modern cameras could not come into being by themselves without the influence of outside agencies. So what we say is that in building processes, the more complicated they become, more there is the certainty of a conscious being present before that thing came into being, in that complex form. There has to be outside agents working upon such complex units or creations. Otherwise, there is no logic in things left at all. So it's not our imagination. It is a direct inference of our observations. This is a simple thing which was even understood by people of the older centuries. I mean, the religious people knew that the reason why we believe in God is not because we think things present, they could be eternal, but because there is an organization, an organization which is entirely dependent upon outside agencies. The question of who made those agencies is not a relevant question because we don't know them. What we know is that the things as we find them today, in the form we find them today, could not be eternal. Like Hazrat Imam Abu Hanifa, for instance, once was invited for a debate with an atheist of his time. And the atheism-theism relationship is not a new one. I mean, the present day man thinks that because he's advanced too much so, he has a right to be atheist. He has as much right to be atheist as people 10,000 years ago. And the religious people have as much right to be theists as people 10,000 years ago. That co-relationship, that balance of ratio and proportion remains exactly the same. Nobody can change this relationship because there are other factors involved in this than just simple development of man's thought, I mean. Leaving that question aside, otherwise it will lead us to other complexities, I quote the incident which came to my mind of Hazrat Abu Hanifa. A time was set when he was to reach a certain place where he was to hold a debate with an atheist on the existence of God. There was a small river between him, the place where he was, and the place that is the venue of this debate. So he reached there very late. All the people were looking forward to his coming and defeating this atheist, and they waited and waited and waited for hours, and there was no sign of Hazrat Imam Abu Hanifa. So ultimately they saw him coming, and the atheist was very angry. He said, look here, this is what God creates, your God? People like this, who can't keep time, who can't be punctual? What is the use of believing in such a God who teaches you, such things, and whose followers are so indisciplined and so on? So Hazrat Imam Abu Hanifa said, look here, just wait, please listen to my side, listen to the reasons why I am late, and then decide for yourself whether I was helpless or there were things beyond my control or not. So he said, all right, what is your explanation? He said, my explanation is that there is a river in between, and when I reached that river, the other bank, there was no boat. Normally there used to be a boat, but there was no boat. So I waited and waited for some boat to appear, but instead of a boat appearing, I saw a stir in the wind, and ultimately the wind started moving very fast, and it turned into a hurricane, and the trees started falling. And a tree fell quite close to me. And then I saw a saw, an iron saw, also carried by the wind, and the wind started moving to and fro. And the saw started working on that, that tree until it turned into planks, and the wind then threw them apart, and they were just in the form of a boat shape. Then I saw nails being carried by the wind, and they started dropping, the head on the top and the narrow edge towards the planks, and they fell on angles in which they started binding the two planks. And I also saw stones and hammers falling on the heads of the nails, All this was created by the wind. And it went on and on until the boat was ready. So when it was ready, it took about 3 hours or so. So then I didn't waste my time, I started. So that man, got exasperated. He went, absolutely, he was hitting the roof by the time he had finished. And he said, imagine such a liar. He believes in God. It's impossible, it can't happen. He said, well, is it impossible? Why? You can happen. A much more complicated thing than this boat. And this boat can't come into being by these forces working in correlationship with each other. So he said, that is the part I wanted to say, that's all. But that boat's creation is a very simple phenomenon as compared to the creation of an eyeball. And the so-called evolutionists have always surrendered to this question. They can offer no explanation whatsoever by any process of evolution that an eyeball could be created through evolutionary processes. You find evolution in the eye, but the very first eye in itself needs millions and millions of years of evolutionary processes to be built, if that evolution is directed, not otherwise. Because there is a retina, and there is an eyeball, there is an iris and other concomitant parts of the eye, which cannot be built by evolutionary process by imagining that first a retina was created without any purpose. And only those animals survived which had retina. Why should those animals survive which had a retina on a certain place? And gradually it so happened that through mutation a lens was created just beyond the retina. And through mutation that remained there without any liquid in between and without proportion or without measured distances and all that. It continued to be there until gradually, and only those animals survived which had that beginning of the eyeball. Why should they only survive? Because that eyeball was still not for serving any purpose. It was not giving any advantage to such animals who had just this thing. And then gradually it started calculating distances by itself between the lens of the eye and the retina started developing cones and rods. Cones for conceiving the colors other than black and white, and the rods for conceiving the black and white pictures. And then ultimately the muscles started building around them to squeeze the eyes, to make them photosensitive, and also a nerve started building starting from the brain center, joining the place in the retina which was just the right place for the image to be built. And then by itself it started coding and uncoding, decoding the messages which it received and started giving it a shape of man and things in the universe and so on. Now, the very simplest optical instrument, the very simplest, cannot come into being by itself. Again, despite the fact that it is governed by the laws of physics, and the explanation how can be given by any elementary student of physics. But as far as the question of who is concerned, that question is never raised by scientists, and they are not interested in that question. But nothing, and no thing, I mean to make an emphasis on no, can come into being by itself which is organized and which uses the forces of nature in special order and special layers and special relationships by making the full use of their interplay. Because we find such things in the universe, in every scientific chapter. So we are compelled to believe, it's not an imagination, we are compelled to believe that there has to be an organizer, which must precede the existence of this organized body. That is our argument. There is no imagination involved. It's a compulsion. There is no other way out for a sane man. Right? It's a very interesting subject. One can go on giving illustrations in every chapter of science, scientific field I mean. But later on, maybe not, you keep this, with you this page. Yes, please.
Is the account of the prophet Jonah and burning of the whale for 3 days to be taken literally or figuratively? If meant literally, how did he survive without oxygen? As the normal person would be broken down in the body of the fish by the action of acids, is Jonah's body coming out of the fish alive to be construed as a miracle?
Yes. I couldn't follow the first part of your question, but what I imagine is that you are asking about Prophet Jonah, survival in the belly of the fish. Is that not right?
Is it figurative or literal? Is it taken literally or figuratively?
Yes, I now understand, yes. The fact is that the Holy Quran does not mention at all that the fish swallowed Jonah whole and he went into the belly of the fish, while the Bible does. So this is the one very important variation in the statement of the Holy Quran and the statement of the Bible, which is all important in solving this question. According to the Holy Quran, although he was swallowed, but it doesn't say that swallowing attempt was so successful as he was engulfed entirely and was transferred to the stomach. So any person who is attempted to be swallowed by a fish or by a reptile, if he is a man with 2 legs, is likely to get stuck somewhere in the esophagus or some throat cavity or something. Because this we have even observed in the real world here, not in the historical world. For instance, I tell you, once my uncle, Sayyid Mahmudullah Shah, the late Sayyid Mahmudullah Shah, who had spent many years in Nairobi as in a school, he told me something of his own experience, that once in the morning he was going somewhere in the street, and he in fact for a walk, he used to go for a walk, and he saw a strange thing, that a python had attempted to swallow a drunkard man who had fallen on the one side of the road with one leg dangling in the ditch. And that python approached him and he tried to swallow that leg with one leg outside his mouth. So he kept on doing it repeatedly, with the result that ultimately that leg turned into something like jelly, Every bone was crushed, but he still could not swallow, could not sever the leg, and the leg remained attached to the body. That man was removed in time to the hospital and was operated upon and lived afterwards some long life. Now, why can't one conceive that something of that nature might have happened to Jonah? Particularly if that fish be a whale, we know that the whale has no gills but has lungs, and it has to appear repeatedly to the surface for breathing. Now, if a whale has attempted to swallow a man who gets stuck somewhere in the throat with head jutting out, and that whale also feels very restless in such a position that animal is likely to feel extremely restless. So instead of coming out to the surface for breathing for once, if it goes on repeating coming to the surface, until finally it has ejected that object of irritation, it is very much likely. I mean, it is not impossible. If not likely, it is not impossible at all. So because the Holy Quran does not word the use that the fish, whatever it was, swallowed Jonah whole to its belly. So that account, according to me, can be accepted literally. And as far as the biblical account is concerned, either it has to be rejected or it has to be accepted metaphorically. And I think the normal thing would be to accept it to be literally, because this has become a legend, a figure. Otherwise, every prophet goes through the same experience of crisis. If it is taken metaphorically, it wouldn't mean anything. Why Jonah alone to be quoted as having been swallowed by a fish, if it is only to indicate a crisis he was facing? So every prophet faces crisis and comes out whole of each such crisis. So I think it would be meaningless unless we take it to be literal happening. Yes, please. Any other question? Rashid Sahib, I know you are getting restless like the whale was before she ejected Jonah. Huh? So what are you going to order?
I had a cramp in my leg, that's all.
Fun?
I had a cramp in my leg, that's all.
Achha. So you turned it to your advantage, catching my eye.
I have two small questions to ask, if you allow me to.
Of course, I would, but one after the other, please. One by one. First one and then second, if the time permits.
Africa is usually referred as the darkest country, darkest continent.
Why?
That's what I was going to ask.
That is what I am asking you.
Africa is usually referred as the darkest continent.
Not darkest, it is referred to as the dark continent, not as the darkest.
Is there any religious explanation for this?
No, it's not a religious term at all. Why should there be a religious explanation for a term coined by irreligious people?
Well, I'm asking this because in Nigeria there is no written history of any sort of religion prior to English people going there and starting out with whatever they did.
Who tells you this?
I found this through some chiefs.
Which chiefs? Who?
Somebody has come from Nigeria.
Yes.
He has mentioned this, that there is no prior history to British people going to Nigeria or northern Africa, for that matter.
No, it's totally wrong. I refer to you to a book written by Mr. Kenyatta. Joseph Kenyatta, was it? Jomo Kenyatta, that's right. The name of the book is Mount Kenya or something.
Facing Mount Kenya.
Mount Kenya, that's right, yes. It's a very interesting book on African mind, not only about the Kenyans, but on the African mind and the relationship of African religious thought with the Christianity and the interplay and the questions it has raised and so on and so forth. So you better read that book. That chief was definitely a greater chief than your chief. He knows Africa much better. Nowhere in Africa will you find any people, any tribe, without the concept of religion which they have inherited from the past. And there is an order, there is a system, an interrelationship between the two, between so many religions, but ultimately it leads to one. And also there is another book which I have forgotten the title, but I do have it somewhere in Dabba. That's also written on Africa. It's a very interesting book, much more interesting than this, the book which gives a history of religious forces working in Africa who came from outside, or forces which were, which reacted from within, and ultimate questions which this struggle raised in the minds of Africans and so on. It also gives very interesting data on the Christian missionaries of various churches, and it's mind-boggling that data. In South Africa, for instance, the book tells us that about 25,000 churches are made by just one single church organization, and so on and so forth. So read that book, and then you will know that there was not only a native religion and concept of God, but it kept on resisting the foreign influences of various religions, and is still kept alive. Please. Yes, after this, please, I would like you to ask, because we are talking of your continent.
The concept of Africa being a dark continent.
Yes.
I had the opportunity to discuss this with some friends at Cambridge University.
I see.
They did invite me to speak about this concept.
I see. I see. This was the subject of your speech. This is interesting. Yes. So you are the right person to advise us as to how it came into being and its validity, etc.
As Brazil already pointed out, it has something to do with the medium.
Of course.
It's a geographical concept.
Yes.
And there are those who try to write about Africa in the past. They don't go into the interior of Africa to know the existence of world empires in Africa. One of them was the empire of Ghana, whose capital excavated, they used to call it some 600 years ago, most recent. And it was only the Sahara encroaching on the city that made people come down. And these people, according to Israel, crossed the Red Sea from the Middle East to Egypt, and then moved down. So there was
So this is a connotation of being impregnable or unreachable, inaccessible. That's right, yes. It could not be penetrated deep enough. So there was always a mystery of unknown about it. So that is why they call it dark.
And yes. The plateau nature of the continent.
Yes.
They couldn't take a boat inside. When they thought.
And also, I think it's far too shaded by the, by the lush growth of jungle and wood. Yes. There are large patches in Africa which are really dark even during the day because of this lush growth. Only the top surface of the trees sees light. And particularly in Congo, there are still areas where no light reaches the soil because of this. Yes, it's so thick.
Now this, about the concept of God, if you examine African languages linguistically, we take the tree, for instance, which I speak in Ghana. We have Onyankopon. Onyankopon, the end pon there is the omnipotent.
I see.
The omnipotent.
It's omnipotent,
So,
yes.
the omnipotent. So it runs through several languages along the West African coast. The Yorubas have it. So I'm really surprised that a Nigerian might have told him this. They have it, the end.
But I think he was anything but a chief.
So that concept is it's so pervading that everybody uses
Right.
it. And one
Was he a Christian? Christian?
Yes.
I think this is, this is a yarn spun by some Christian missionaries, perhaps. They want to prove to the world that it is we who brought light to Africa, and it was in total darkness, and we gave them religion and everything. So that must be the reason why he said it. It was not his own observation. It must have been told by, by some Christians.
And the Nigerian who was recently given the Nobel Prize for Literature,
Yes.
is written on this theme also, where the missionaries who went to Africa could not.
Now tell me, what is the name of this book? I'm interested in reading that book. That particular book, he was given Nobel Prize in Literature not only on one book, but quite a few, some literary works. But this book in particular.
He and one other writer, the first one was, we call that Things Fall Apart.
I see.
Things Fall Apart.
Have you read this?
I've read that.
You read that book, I see. Is it available here in London?
I have the abridged version.
So if you give the title, send me the title in writing, and the press which published it, I think I would ask the Foils or Blackwell to send me a copy, yes.
And so the missionaries who went to introduce the concept of Trinity in Africa, he pictured that they couldn't argue with the African religious people because they had the concept of one God.
Yes,
they were trying to
right.
present this. And
that's very interesting.
They were defeated in the argument because
Correct.
they proved to them that the argument was not sound. So that is.
Thank you. Thank you for helping me. Yes, please. Rashid Sahib, you had another question, or have you withdrawn it?
I seldom withdraw a question. Could you kindly, this is about Mujaddad, I want to know.
About Mujaddidin?
In northern Nigeria, there was a Mujaddad called Usman Wan Fadio.
Fadio.
Could you kindly...
Fadio or Fadio? Fadio, I think.
Fadio.
Yes. Yes.
Sir, do you consider him as a Mujaddad first?
I don't know. He is a controversial figure. Some people believe him to be a Mujaddid and some believe him not to be a Mujaddid. And he is a controversial figure particularly because he not only went into defensive wars, but he also invaded south of Nigeria as far as Benue State and even beyond, I think. For that there is no justification. In the northern wars, he was involved in those wars because he was first expelled. First his activities were restricted unduly and unnecessarily. His religious rights were violated. And he was compelled to leave the country like the Islamic teaching. He first left the land and then built up an army and invaded the country and went into a chain of battles successfully in his favor and ultimately dominated the entire area. So as far as that is concerned, there is nothing wrong from the Islamic point of view. And he was within his rights to go into war with a country which had no right to expel him and to deprive him of his rights. He did not stay within the country to create disorder. That is very important. So his conduct was absolutely correct and above board. But this is the picture which was known to me previously, And because also he served the cause of Islam to a very great degree, I also had the impression, there is no proof, anyway, that whether somebody is a mujaddid or not, it's one's own, free choice to believe in somebody to be a mujaddid or not. It's not compulsory for anyone to believe in a mujaddid as such. But anyway, as far as he is concerned, I had the impression that he was a mujaddid. But later on, when I studied about him from the opposite side, so doubts were created about his being truly a religious man, apart from a political figure or an army general or something. So I don't know. This is my genuine answer. More investigation has to be made from the MBA point of view. But as far as Khalifatul Masih Salis is concerned, he believed he was a mujaddid. He must have read more about him. So the first I heard about him from him, and he held him in very high respect and said he was a mujaddid of Africa. So I don't deny that, but as far as my personal satisfaction is concerned, I should like to read more about him before I make a decision. Yes, just a minute. Dr. Sahib, and then you, and then Bashir Riyad Sahib, if any time is left, right? Dr. Sahib, please.
Reading this ayat in this way, is such a every part of the Quran, every word, every part of the ayat is so widely placed that if you remove one part or one word, all things spoil. And if you read it and feel it as it is, it's full of wisdom and guidance, but still people like me, they want more light from the Hazur and learned people. These are the two bad qualities of certain persons. Those always backbiting, always blowing false others, and those who are holding money more and more, holding much spending in the way of Allah, in the way of the common law, for them there is fire and hell. So let us know what connection it is between Allah joined these two people in one sentence, that the bad character, is it?
I have already given a full sermon of about an hour on this very subject, and you better have access to that tape, cassette. It is tape cassetted, it was not video, but cassette recording was made. So I think all the answers, questions you have raised have been answered in that sermon. I believe that this is not just one person that is referred to, it is the two blocks to be created in future, the two political blocks and their behavior and their, the way they would try to conquer the whole world and reach a sort of eternity, considering themselves to be perpetuated by the forces they amass around them. This is what this verse refers to. Yasabu anna malahu akhlada refers not to a single person, because it cannot. No person, however rich he may be, can ever conceive the idea of his wealth giving him perpetuation. How can one remain forever if he is wealthy? But the nations do misconceive such things, If they are rich, if they are wealthy, if they are very powerful, they feel that their sun would never set. They would continue to remain in power and domineering over the world. So this man, who is it referred to? Obviously is not an individual. It's a block, it's a people who are referred to. And their qualities are mentioned here, that in which there are two, very interesting thing is the word humaza and lumaza mean exactly the same thing. Some dictionaries have tried to create a difference between the meaning of the two, but other dictionaries, more authentic, written by greater scholars, ultimately lead you to the fact that in reality both the words mean the same thing. Humaza is exactly lumaza and lumaza is exactly humaza. So why should the Holy Quran use two words instead of one when one word could suffice? No extra connotation could be added by the usage of another word or the same application in every field. So the answer to me, according to my interpretation, is that there are two peoples referred to in this. Two great powers to be born in future, like Yajuj and Majuj. The similar treatment is given here to the future events when the world would be divided into two blocks. One can be called Lumaza and the other Humaza, like Yajuj and Majuj. And they both have the same qualities, though these qualities are dressed up differently. The attitudes apparently are diametrically opposed, but basically these two people would have the same essential qualities, and both would become very rich and very powerful. And they would think that they will remain forever now. Nobody can dethrone them, nobody can take, nobody can destroy them. But there is something which is going to destroy them, and that is the atom bomb. This is what is mentioned. Because the fire which is referred to as having been trapped for them in the heart of the smallest particle. وَيْلٌ لِكُلِّ هُمَزَةٍ لُمَزَةٍ الَّذِي جَمَعَ مَالًا وَعَدَّدَهُ يَحْسَبُ أَنَّ مَالَهُ أَخْلَدَهُ كَلَّا لَيُنبَذَنَّ فِي الْحُطَمَةِ. Hutam is a particle, like you see in the sunbeam, many particles which are not otherwise visible because they are too small. When they cross the sunbeam, then you see them flying. So in the Arabic, the word for the smallest particle is hutama. A dust particle which is too small, pulverized thing is called hutama. So can you conceive of a fire being trapped in the hutama at the time of the Holy Prophet of Islam? It's not possible. The very idea is impossible. I wonder how the Arabs of that time understood this message. They must have passed over it, skipped over it and said, well, something must be something. So this is why all the previous commentators have referred this event to be the future event after death, which they can't understand here. Because no fire could be trapped, imprisoned in the heart of the smallest particle for somebody to be punished. And that fire is also described how it would ultimately react and act and destroy such people. The qualities which are mentioned are also fantastic. They are very unfire-like as far as the fire known to the people of that time. It says, تَبْتَلِعُ عَلَى رَفِّدَةٍ لَيُبْزَنَّ فِي الْحُطَمَةِ وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْحُطَمَةُ نَارُ اللَّهِ الْمُوقَدَةُ الَّتِي تَبْتَلِعُ عَلَى الْأَفْئِدَةِ إِنَّهَا عَلَيْهِمْ مُؤْصَدَةٌ فِي أَمَدٍ مُمَدَّدَةٍ. It's a very interesting statement, to say the least. It says that they will be subjected to hutama. These people will be destroyed by hutama. And then the Holy Quran raises the question, and what is hutama? What can tell you what hutama is? And this style of the Holy Quran, whenever the Holy Quran adopts this style, means that the people whom we are addressing at this time cannot understand. is something either beyond their comprehension as such, or beyond their comprehension because they don't belong to the age where man will be able to understand such things. So ma adraka is always, an expression of, in our words, in the ordinary usage we say, we surrender. How can we make you understand? If somebody, for instance, you ask somebody what the theory of relativity is, well, you have heard of it, but you can't understand it, unfortunately. So if you ask this question to a scientist, he would say, well, how can I tell you? So it is an expression like that, but not our defeat, because Allah can make people understand. It is only an expression of a temporary, a temporary phase of inadequacy of man to understand such things. So it's not the inadequacy on the part of God that He can't make people understand, but the inadequacy refers to the man of that age, that you are incapable of understanding, at least for the time being. But because the Holy Quran is for all ages, a time was to come when people of some age would begin to understand these things. So it says, وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْهُتَمَةُ. When you say hutama, although it's an ordinary Arabic word, every Arab should know the meaning of this, but you don't know. That shows that it is not just a particle, it is something else. Why should a particle why should not a particle be understood by the Arab? This is the question I am raising. Tell me, give me one good reason why the Arabs of Rasulullah's time should not understand the word hutama. They knew it. Everybody knew that pulverized dust contains hutama. Each particle of that pulverized dust is a hutama. The Holy Quran says no, because it was not understood. Why? Because it goes on to explain. The hutama we have in mind is not just a small particle. Just a moment, please. وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْهُتَمَا نَارُ اللَّهِ الْمُوقِدَةُ الَّتِي. It is Allah's fire which is being built for them. And this fire has a very special quality, not an ordinary fire which just burns. تَبْتَلِعُ عَلَى الْأَفْئِدَةِ. It reaches the heart before it touches the body. It jumps upon the hearts. Now tell me, what sort of fire existed at the time of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam which would jump directly upon the hearts, if you to penetrate into the body and just catch the heart and destroy it? None. There is no fire. The heart was the last thing. For a fire to be reached, first it would burn the body, scorch it or destroy it further, and then heart would cease beating. But this fire, the Holy Quran says, after the warning of Ma Adraka, what can tell you this is? This is a fire which is very special and different from the fire because it will leap upon the hearts. Now if you read the description of what the atom bombs of the modern time or the H-bombs are going to do to man of today, you will be surprised to learn that they say the life would be destroyed much before the heat radiation reaches man. It would be destroyed by the radiation, by the sound or other disturbances caused by some other rays, gamma rays or X-rays, I don't remember which, but the rays which are not the heat radiation, they would travel ahead of heat radiation. And as they travel, in their passage they will destroy life. So when ultimately he reaches that spot, the people would already be dead. So that would leap upon the hearts. This is the fire which is being described by the Holy Quran. تَطَّلِعُ عَلَى الْأَفْئِدَةِ. And again it is not enough. It goes on to say, إِنَّهَا عَلَيْهِمْ مُصَدَّةٌ. It is captured for them and preserved for them, that fire, فِي أَمَدٍ مُمَدَّدَةٍ. In pillars which are extended, spindle-like things, which are being extended. Now, what sort of fire could be caught and imprisoned in the time of Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in small particles which were given the shape of spindles, and before bursting they would be extended. The whole concept does not belong to that age. It is impossible by whatever extension of your imagination. You can't solve this question, why should a man of the age of Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam should speak in these terms to the Arabs, the first addressee of the Holy Quran, or the world entirely as such. No other man was capable of comprehending this. So this is why Ma'adraka. And this is why when you study how the atom bomb begins to explode, and you see the pictures which have been created by computers, etc., you see that mass which is about to explode, it gets extended, mumaddada, and swells and falls back and swells and until ultimately it bursts out. So a fire in extended pillars, or amud is a shape, given to a small particle or a large particle. So this is exactly the picture of atom bomb. Only an H is missing in the atom, which is provided by the H bomb. You see? Very interesting. Hotama, if you remove the H sound, which of course is a letter or a sound which tends to be dropped in many places. If you say Hutam, it is like atom. But a Frenchman will never be able to say Hutam. He would say Hutam. So an H is a quality which is dropped automatically by man. It's a matter of only pronunciation. But a very interesting fact is that even if man drops this H temporarily to reach the atom, it would appear as an H bomb later on. So the entire destructive forces of the future are described in the word Hotama. Read it as atom or H. And the fire which is described is no other, cannot be any other fire, but the fire created by atom bombs or H bombs. So this is the import of this verse. Not the only import, there will be so many other meanings which I can't reach, but this is what I have discovered, and this is why I gave a sermon entirely devoted to this verse. So those people which you have referred to are not individuals, because no individual could claim eternity with the help of wealth he has amassed. Only people can do that. So the references to a people, not to an individual.
This is another question, sir.
Yes.
Such a high chance.
All the time I thought you were thinking of the question, but were you also trying to understand my answer? Yeah, you were with me?
Yes, sir.
Because I saw always a question, looming large on your forehead. Pardon?
The same thing expanding more.
All right, good, please.
If this philosophy, high knowledge, we get from Huzur and from the Khulafa Islam, if we take this commentary and this knowledge and explanations to the Arabs, they will kiss your hands, they will very thankful to you.
They would rather sever them instead of kissing them.
They came to the Quran, it's our duty to return them the full knowledge.
Of course it's duty.
Some of us who want us.
They are the same Arabs who rejected the Quran first.
They're not all of them, sir.
I know. So there are some who would like to kiss my hand for this, but the majority would not. We would have telling you. The Arabs are the same. If they dare to reject the whole Quran, why should they not reject a portion thereof? If they are distorted, in the first place they were distorted in the beginning, so they rejected the greatest treasure ever revealed to man. If they have fallen back to the same way of thinking and the same corrupt habits and so on, most unfortunately, they should adopt the same attitude to the truth as they did once.
No, sir, there's different attitude. If you
settle
there and become a part and parcel of the community,
So all right, don't save my hands while your hands are dead. You must like him to go anywhere and start from Saudi Arabia.
If you're taking for 2-3 weeks going to Morocco,
Morocco is different, please sit down, yes. Anything else, please? Yes, now it's your turn. Walaikum salam. How are you? Fine.
I'm not prepared for this question, so it's just a commentary that I'll pass it over.
Could you raise it a little bit or come closer? Both? Yes?
Okay.
Yes?
It's a passage I remember from the Quran, and I'm wondering if you know British people asking how it fits into the radicalism between religion and ethics. Passages where Muslims are allowed to be the ones.
Yes, correct. I have spoken on this many a time. You know, the fact is that this practice of beating wives is much more common in the Western countries today than in the Muslim countries. I know in Pakistan, in the educated societies of the level that you find here everywhere in Europe, there would hardly be any cases of beating somebody beating his wife as compared to the incidents of such unfortunate things in Europe. So when I compare, I lay this condition that people belong to the same education standard. That would make my statement much more realistic than otherwise. Because in the ignorant society, the people do beat their wives, or sometimes they are cruel to the women folk, not because of Islam. Because Islam is knowledge, Islam is light. Because of their total ignorance of Islam. So any act on their part should not be unnecessarily and unjustifiably referred to Islam. Islam should not bear responsibility for that. But in the educated societies of the Muslim world, of the same order and standard as you find in Europe, you will find comparatively much less incidents of people beating their wives than you find here in Europe. What is responsible for that here and what is responsible for that there? This is the question now to be asked. It is not that in this incident, in this case, suddenly Europeans become Muslims before they start beating their wives. It is lack of orderliness, lack of discipline, lack of control, which causes this. And women are hurt much more here, unfortunately. And their rights are trampled upon, and nobody raises an eyebrow against it. And nobody attributes this fault to any philosophy, any way of life, any culture and things. While the Western society as such is a culture and it should be held responsible for these acts. And we are found in greater number here. So, in reality, Islam is not responsible. What Islam does is, Islam knows this tendency of man to start beating his wife, and instead of totally stopping him, Islam educates him, disciplines him, and tells him when to do it and when not to do it. So it is a preventive order because of the discipline attached to it, rather than a probative order. This is why in the Arab world, when this order was given, this injunction was given, the effect was not that people who had not got used to beating their wives, they started beating because now it is permitted from God. Because of the conditions laid down, which are so strict and so difficult to follow, the beating was discouraged rather than encouraged by this verse. And it is still so, because I can assure you, if the same society, European advanced society to which they refer as comparison, if they become Muslims, those incidents of cruelty to women would disappear here too. Now you should understand the reason why this permission was given and why to one party and why not to the other party and so on and so forth. Then you will understand this is not a question of equality or inequality. It's a question of realism. It's a question of some constitutional differences between man and woman, and also the acceptance of the fact that in every house there are rivalries, there are lost tempers, and some people lose temper and start beating the others. Someday it is in some few countries it is women who have the upper hand, like in Italy. But in most other countries it is men who do that. So it's a fact of life. So a religion which is realistic cannot ignore it. What it does is to discipline things and to give order to such things. Islam raises this question in relation to a woman's being, turning into an unfaithful woman. A woman who is falling under increasing suspicion because of her some suspicious behaviors, and his loyalty and his faithfulness to the husband is no longer dependable. And also she begins to behave violently in the house and rebelliously. She begins to shout at the husband, begins to create disorder, and also she is not true to her loyalty, to her vow to remain loyal to that. Both parties are, of course, equally treated. Now, what would the Holy Quran do in this case? The Holy Quran could take the attitude that all right, break immediately, chuck that woman out and get separated. That would again be very cruel and unreal too. Because there are situations where people who are led astray can be brought back, who can be treated with kindness to begin with and firmness later on. But things can become retrievable, which sometimes appear to be irretrievable. So this is the attitude taken by the Holy Quran. And it says, in the first place, you are not permitted to beat such a woman. Despite the fact that you begin to suspect, you are not permitted to lose your temper. What you are permitted to do is to try to mend things by persuasion and by logic and by making her see things. And yet you can also have the help of elders of the family. You should try to make such a lady understand and rectify her ways. If she does not, then the second layer, which is described in the same verse prior to this, is that you should have separate beds for a while. Now this is a very interesting and a relevant layer suggested. If you are suspicious of your wife's character, then prove that suspicion in reality by imposing constraint on yourself. Don't go to the wife when you so desire and yet continue blaming her for disloyalty. This is not the honest way to treat ladies. If you think she is disloyal and she is wrong, then at least stop going to her. Now that would put constraint on you. The rising passions would be subdued, and instead desire would dispel such rising passions of anger and would begin to displace that anger. You will not be in a frame of mind to meet the lady when you are keeping a separate life and you are impelled by your own desire to meet her and get satisfaction. So it is a punishment on both sides, in a manner of speaking. more so on the man because he thought that the wife is not loyal, so he should abstain then from retaining the same relationship as husband and wife. After that, if either he is not come to senses by that time or the wife has not improved, then he can beat her with the condition that he should not injure the wife or incapacitate her in any way, or beat her, for instance, on sensitive parts, on face, on places where it could cause some danger. So this verse was fully explained by Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam because he was the recipient of this verse. So his education, his commentary was a guided commentary, not like a commentary of anybody else. He received the message, he understood it, and he translated it as such and told his companions. And having received this verse, he did not encourage beating, he discouraged. He knew the import of this verse was to discourage people to be, like trigger happy, to be given to this habit of raising their hand suddenly on the spur of an emotion. So this is why all the time he continued telling his companions to treat their wives gently and not to be hasty in trying to punish them. So if the men were not permitted even at that stage to give some sort of punishment to the ladies, then imagine what would be the alternative. The alternative would be to leave such women alone, completely, or divorce them. And this is the last resort which has been treated. Now in this disciplined society with raised moral standards, when the heat of the moment is over and after having taken all these measures, a man considers that there is no way left but to punish the woman bodily. If this is objectionable, then compare such societies who consider this objectionable but have not that moral teaching of Islam with a society where this is permissible, a special set of the moral teaching. And you can immediately see the differences between the actual behavior of people towards women in these two different societies. One is apparently backward, one is apparently cruel, one is apparently giving greater rights to men. But in reality, in everyday life, this is not so. The other society condemns it verbally, very strongly, but is being led more and more to more cruelty to women. More incidents are being reported that women are mistreated or maltreated. So Islam is a realistic religion, it should be understood as such. And in the end, as I always tell the questioners, you should understand this verse by the conduct of the Holy Prophet of Islam, because he knew what was permitted to him. He did not have only one wife, he had 9 wives. Yet he did not raise even the smallest finger against any of his wives. Some of whom are rude with him, sometimes disrespectfully, raising their voices. Some of them are known to have angered him to a degree where he ceased going to them and effected a sort of boycott for a full month with all his wives. But he never punished them bodily. So if the Holy Quran meant to encourage this, how could the Holy Prophet of Islam behave exactly opposite, the other way around? So as the verse was understood, it was, not the simple message that you should start, you should be free with your hands and start beating your wives. It was not the message which was received by the Holy Prophet. because its conduct tells us it was the other way around. The result was that the women were made bolder than before, ever bolder than before. They became, they rose to a status where they thought they were now given equality with men. This was the message received by the first generation to which the Holy Quran was being revealed. And this is why it was not women who complained to the Holy Prophet that the teachings of the Holy Quran are giving us unequal rights. It were always men who complained to the Holy Prophet that what is this teaching? This is giving equal rights to women. So their conception must be more reliable than your conception after 1400 years. The message received by the men of that time was that here is a teaching which gives equal rights to women. More than that, because Hazrat Umar is known to have complained to Anand that your teaching, your conduct has turned women rebellious in our houses. Things are happening which you could never conceive of before. So Islam is addressing to the believers, not to a non-believing society. And those believers are disciplined by a much wider teaching. And they are educated and brought up, and they are made civilized. And even then certain conditions are laid. So the incidents of beating somebody's wife would become so rare in such a society, in view of it is much more common because such societies are given to passion and they don't have to order their lives according to a teaching.
Can I ask this also?
Pardon?
I think the question of people who are if I give this answer, people will ask me this question. I understand the rights of women in that context. Do they have reciprocal rights if their husbands misbehave?
Yes, I forgot to come to that. In the beginning I said Islam is a realistic religion which also keeps the differences in constitutions. Now, when there is free for all, why does it so happen that generally speaking, most often than not, it is always men who are cruel to women and not women to men? Why? Because man is more powerful physically. This is why in the Olympics you have different context for men and women. Why don't you give them equal rights there? Why shouldn't they? There you are depriving men, in fact. You are giving more rights to women. By holding separate contests, you know they are weaker. So if Islam permitted the weaker sex to start beating the stronger sex, what would happen? They would be beaten much more, in turn than otherwise.
I wasn't thinking of beating, I was thinking of reciprocal rights in if a husband misbehaves in the way that wife misbehaves in that context.
Yes, I understand. There the women are given greater rights, again because of their constitutional weaknesses. If there is a relationship which is so disturbed that both of them understand that nothing can be done to improve this relationship, to give it a sort of permanence, then the Holy Quran permits them to separate. Now, because man is stronger, generally speaking, and is more, offensive in behavior than women are, so Islam makes it more difficult for a man to divorce his wife. And that divorce can only be effected and finalized in a regular court. And the conditions laid are very difficult. For 3 months continuously he has to remain separate from his wife, And during those 3 months, the wife has to remain there in the house, and he is not permitted to misbehave in any manner to that wife during that period. He must continue giving her full rights. And after that, if he still decides that the divorce is the only solution, then he has to go to the court and prove his point, and then he is given the right of divorce. On the other hand, because women are weak and their rights cannot be safeguarded, if they are afraid of misbehavior on the part of their husbands, or if they believe that they are disloyal to them, or for any other reason they cease to love them, it is just enough for them to go to an Islamic court and tell them that I have no reason, no evidence to produce, but I can't live with that man anymore. That should be sufficient. On just this ground, Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself effected a divorce. When a lady just walked up to him and said that I can't live with my husband anymore. And the question was why? He said he is a very good person. Instead of finding fault with him, she started praising him in every regard. And said he is such a fine man, such humble, so sacrificing and good looking in everything. But I don't like, I don't know why, I can't just be compatible with him, I can't live with him. And Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that this is enough reason. If you know you can't cope with this, then you are right for separation. And the separation was given on just for this. While for men it is not so easy. They have to prove to the court that the wife is wrong and this is what she did and this is what she does not do and so on and so forth. And then the divorce would be given in that case. So here women enjoy even better right, but I don't say better right because I know it is a constitutional requirement which the Holy Quran meets. Both have equal rights in the sight of Allah. But where constitutional differences demand a different treatment, the principle of equal rights demands that treatment should be different. No, was this the aspect you wanted to? No, there is something else. I think there is a little bit. Still, the question is not answered, or maybe you are satisfied, but your non-Ahmadi friends or Christian friends would not be satisfied.
I'm thinking the questions I'll get. I mean, the answer is fine for me, but many women would regard it that they're still being treated.
Yes, I know. This is what I mean. I found some, shadow of suspicion on your face, which was not your own. You were thinking in terms of presenting the case of Islam to your non-Muslim friends, following my arguments, and yet being unable to satisfy them with all this. Is that not right?
Yes.
Yes. So in that case, I can't do anything. Nor can you. There are certain things I have shown you for which we can only plead Islam's cause if somebody has gone too far away from the correct values. He will not agree with you still. But it is for you to try to advocate and limit at that. Then you are not responsible for convictions. But I give you another approach to such people. You say, all right, so you can address such ladies by saying to them, that all right, if this is the objection against Islam, why you don't become Muslim? If I prove from the Bible that both the Old Testament and the New Testament are much, much more cruel to women. Why? No, I'm telling you. Then you should leave Christianity. If you do not believe in religion, you believe in any civilization, then your question is inadequate, is not a pertinent question at all. Because first, the basic question should be discussed. Whether there is a God or not. If there does exist a God, is he not the creator or not? If he is the creator, then does he enjoy the first right or not of disciplining our lives? So the question will take a completely different turn then.
It's a question of discipline rather than...
Huh?
It's a question of discipline.
That's right, yes. So in that case, you should have an analytical approach to the persons you are addressing. To Christians or to Jews or to other followers of religions, you can always challenge, humbly so, not in bombastic fashion, but mildly, but firmly you can tell them, look here, if this is the only reason why you are not becoming Muslim, I see no reason why you remain Christian or remain Jew or remain whatever you are, because Islam is the only religion which gives respectability to man-woman relationship and which does not deprive women of such rights which even your modern societies don't give them. In England, even today, in Europe, in America, in other modern societies, women don't have a right to inherit automatically, by right. Show me one country where the modern civilization of man has given women the right to inherit their parents automatically by their own right. There is no such country in the world. And no such religion either, except Islam. So on the positive side, you shut your eyes. And after searching the horizon, you find one prickly point, and you try to emphasize it out of shape and out of proportion to the rest of the teaching. This is not an honest approach. So these people would never be convinced unless you drag them back to the fundamentals. Find out who they are.
No, they agree with fundamentals, that's the problem. It is a point, just as a stumbling block for some.
Pardon?
They actually agree with fundamentals.
They believe in God?
They believe in God, they believe in marriage, which is the Quran.
They believe in the teaching of the Holy Quran. So all right, so this is a very special case then. They are Muslims already, they believe in the Holy Quran, and they can't understand this part. So the answer for them is very simple. If in such case where detailed teaching of a system is not comprehensible, no man can ever claim to understand everything of a system. Yet he learns to live with it. Even in democracies, a large number, closing upon the halfway size, disagrees on certain things with the majority and accepts that decision and follows into actions. So this is, the inadequacy of man. He can't agree with everything he believes in, logically speaking. Yet, if that disagreement enlarges much more and reaches the fundamentals, where it is no longer possible for him to make it, to reconcile with those differences, then it is a choice for him to leave the whole system, not piece bit by bit, but either to accept it or to, for instance, to migrate to some other country if you don't agree with the British majority decisions. It is not for you to disagree in parts and frame a different way of life here while enjoying the other aspects of the British life. The choice is simply this: either live here, learn to live here with differences and obey to the majority's will, or to walk out. So in religions too, there are stages when you begin to disagree with the fundamentals to a degree that you depart from the whole religion ultimately. So you tell such ladies or men that if this little differences is rankling too much in your heart, either you have to agree that God is wiser than you. You tell them, I have tried to make you understand this is wisdom of this, but you don't, all right. I can't change your mind, but at least I can tell you that the God in whom you believe, you also believe that He is wiser than you. So understand that there are certain things in which He knows human psyche better, but He is not an unjust God. That's enough. Yes, yes. Yes? Oh, you have still to ask a question while the time is over?
No, what I wanted to say, as a Zul permitted me to ask a question.
Did I?
My wish.
When did I say permit you? No, I didn't say that. I say after him if time permits.
Yes.
So the time doesn't permit. You can't say. What you wanted to say, you can't say because the time doesn't permit. All right, go to the microphone and then say what you must say. Yes.
What you permit me to ask a question, but my wish is that I should not ask a question today.
Jazakumullah. Beautiful. I thank you on behalf of all the audience.
That was my wish.
Jazakumullah. And I assure you this is the wish of everybody else as well. Thank you.